I'm Jamie Tiampo, and I'm Insatiably Curious. Together, we'll explore everything about food, one ingredient at a time. I'm on the 86-mile Rappahannock River to meet Ryan and Travis Craxton. As you can see, this beautiful, pristine, unspoiled water is really the perfect place to start an oyster farm. Guys, thanks for having us out here.
Thanks for coming.
How did you guys get started into this business?
It was actually a fluke. I mean, we just, over a couple of beers like this, just started talking about getting our own stash of oysters. So we got about 1,000 oysters and threw them out into the river, and it took about a year and a half to get them to market size.
The cousins researched everything they could on aquaculture and started growing oysters in a part of the Chesapeake Bay once harvested by their great-grandfather.
We threw some oysters out there, and about a year and a half later they came to market size. We thought they were fantastic.
The next step was to get their product into some restaurants.
So we got a Zagat guide to New York City and said, let's just go with the #1 restaurant at the time, and I think it still is. Le Bernardin was the #1 restaurant. I just relayed the message, too, that we had kind of started up our great-grandfather's oyster farm, and again, using aquaculture, and we were just interested in showing them our oysters. Next thing we knew, we get a call back saying we'd love to meet you guys. So Trav and I hop in a car, loaded up with a cooler, head up to New York, and we had absolutely no idea what we were going to sell them for, how we were going to get them there.
How to present it.
Trav and I were sweating bullets over trying to shuck it, and actually we're doing a pretty bad job of it until Chris just took the oyster from us and shucked it himself.
This is how you do it.
Right. And absolutely fell in love with them.
Tell me about your grandfather and these, you've got some great historical documents here.
This document's from our great-grandfather from 1899 all the way until about 1990. And each one of these books has each season and what was planted and what was harvested. And you'll find in some of the years, like 1954, I believe it was, when Hurricane Hazel came through, you'll have all that he planted, and then at the very end of it, it'll say total loss. And so our grandfather actually discouraged our fathers from going into it. So when we revived it, it was after a 10-year lag, where we just hadn't been doing anything. And when we came back into it, we decided we were going to use aquaculture, just because we didn't want to be doing the old dredge methods that were disruptive to the bay.
Let's go out on the boat and see how these things are grown. Ryan and Travis grow their oysters very differently from their great-grandfather. Oystermen essentially used to let the oysters grow wild in clusters, scraping up whatever they could dredge from the bottom of the bay.
And they would just push the oysters over. 3 years later, they'd come back and they'd pull them up, and then they'd just sell them. So there was absolutely no attention to them while they were out there. It was 3 years, and then they'd come get them.
The Rappahannock crew introduces oyster larvae into the bay when they are about 1 millimeter wide. They already look like tiny oysters, and are put in plastic mesh bags, where they're allowed to grow until they can be introduced into the larger cages.
We constantly have to give these attention so that they'll be pretty, so that they'll stay separate, and also because the way we hatch these, we don't get our seed from the river. We produce our seed in a lab. Imagine it like horses. We just get champion steeds. You know, we get some studs out of here, and we take them in and just reproduce them based off of that brood stock.
Each oyster filters up to 50 gallons of water a day, which helps naturally clean the Chesapeake Bay. Oyster farming is actually beneficial for the environment, and helps reduce the natural algae blooms that can choke off oxygen in the water.
The algae is what's making it opaque and so dark you can't penetrate, sunlight can't penetrate it to make the grasses grow. So the more oysters we can get in here, the more algae we can get out of here.
Cultivating oysters with aquaculture is a much more sustainable practice than harvesting wild oysters because none of the native oysters are removed.
The wild oysters, of course, are just going to be taking from the bay. I mean, that's not a sustainable thing, so they're going to last as long as you have a supply.
Rappahannock River Oysters is working cooperatively with the Chesapeake Bay Foundation to introduce a new oyster, the barcat.
The barcat is like the little guy boat. It's a single boat, one person operated. So we thought that was nice and emblematic of what we were trying to do, which is get the little guy. Because the nice thing about these guys is they're independent spirits. They don't want to be working for anybody. They want to be able to maintain their independence the way they've always done things. And so this allows them to do that and also be contributing in a positive way.
The Chesapeake Bay is the largest estuary in the country and has different flavors at every bend of the river, each depending on the local conditions.
If you look at a map of the Chesapeake Bay, I mean, it's the Napa Valley of oysters, because you've just got this perfect blend. You've got all this fresh water coming from the Blue Ridge Mountain and all the salt water coming in from the ocean. So you get this brackish blend that anywhere you plop down, you're going to get a completely different taste profile.
Thank you for showing me how to grow these oysters, and all the wonderful stuff you're doing on the bay here. Let's take these, bag them up, bring them back on land, and cook them up.